Welcome to today's Deep Dive, learner. We are just so glad you're here with us today.
Yeah, really excited for this one.
So, to kick things off, let me ask you to picture a scenario. Have you ever found yourself caught in a really tense group chat?
Oh, definitely.
Right. Or maybe you were just casually scrolling through some heated online debate about, men versus women, and you just stopped to wonder, how did the conversation become so incredibly toxic?
It happens so fast, too.
It really does. It often feels like everyone is just at each other's throats, drawing these really rigid battle lines in the sand.
Yeah, treating the opposite sex as basically an enemy combatant.
Exactly.
And it's a dynamic that seems to dominate a massive portion of our digital and even personal interactions right now.
Yeah.
When you look at the structure of these debates, it becomes pretty clear how easily individuals just get swept up in that current.
Yeah.
People often enter these conversations not to actually understand anything.
But to defend.
Exactly, to defend a position they feel is constantly under attack.
And that dynamic is exactly what our mission is for this deep dive. Today, we are exploring a really fascinating stack of source materials from author and podcaster Blaze on Fire.
Some really great stuff in here.
Truly. We're looking at excerpts from her Say No to Gender Wars group chat discussion guide. We're also pulling thematic elements from her Lovers and Haters book trilogy.
And looking at the visual imagery of her personal branding, too.
Right. So the goal today is to unpack this completely different framework she presents for understanding relationship conflicts.
Because the author suggests shifting the focus entirely away from gender.
Which is huge.
It is. Instead, she attributes the root cause of these cultural clashes to unhealed human trauma. And along the way, we're going to guide you through the practical tools the text outlines for navigating these conversations when they, as they always do, inevitably pop up in your own life.
Okay, let's unpack this. I want to lead with the most striking, probably the most provocative concept from the author's text.
Main thesis.
Yeah, her core thesis. She argues that there is actually no such thing as a gender war.
None at all.
Right. What we are collectively calling a gender war, she writes, is simply a population of jaded people who have been hurt by specific individuals. And now they are just walking around bleeding on everyone else they come into contact with.
It's such a vivid image, and she builds this idea around a psychological concept she frames as projected pain.
Projected pain, right.
To really understand this, we have to look at how unprocessed trauma functions in the brain. When someone experiences a deep betrayal or a devastating breakup or abuse, the brain just automatically initiates a defense mechanism.
It's trying to protect itself.
Exactly. So the text suggests that as a survival strategy, an individual will look for a broad category to blame, rather than facing the isolated, painful incident.
Because blaming an entire category of people, that changes the narrative entirely.
It does.
It shifts the focus away from that specific, really vulnerable moment of betrayal.
That is the central argument here. The text points out that it is far less emotionally taxing to direct your anger at an entire gender than it is to sit with the vulnerability of one specific agonizing experience.
Yeah, that makes total sense.
When an individual hasn't processed their past wounds, their entire worldview becomes filtered through that trauma. They begin to view literally any interaction with the opposite sex through a lens of anticipated hostility or betrayal.
And the author summarizes this with a very specific, memorable phrase. She says people end up bleeding on people who didn't cut them.
Bleeding on people who didn't cut them.
Yeah. I want you, the learner, to take a second to reflect on this. The next time you see someone lashing out online or dominating a group chat with hostility toward men or women, ask yourself if they're actually at war with an entire demographic. Or are they externalizing a private, unhealed wound?
Because viewing the hostility through that lens, it fundamentally changes the interaction. The author proposes that recognizing this dynamic allows a person to step back from feeling defensive.
You stop taking it personally.
Exactly. Instead of seeing a personal attack, you realize you're just witnessing the externalization of unresolved grief or anger.
Which naturally brings up the question of how to actually handle these situations when you find yourself right in the middle of them.
Because you will find yourself in them.
Oh, without a doubt. And the author provides a really practical toolkit in her Say No to Gender Wars group chat discussion guide. The stated goal of this guide isn't to win the argument, which I love.
Right. Winning isn't the point.
The objective is to sound wise and elevate the discussion above the standard back-and-forth mudslinging.
And the text outlines several specific steps to actually de-escalate these debates. The first technique she introduces is called the pivot to systems.
Pivot to systems.
Yeah. So when a conversation devolves into blaming individuals, like Statements such as men always do this or women always do that. The guide advises pivoting the focus towards socialization.
Okay, so you reframe it.
You reframe the friction as a byproduct of outdated social scripts colliding with a rapidly changing modern world.
That's incredibly smart. It reframes the conflict entirely. Instead of making it about personal failings, it becomes a conversation about how society is redefining expectations, which naturally creates tension for everyone involved.
Everyone. Building on that, the text introduces the concept of double-sided vulnerability. The instruction here is to actively acknowledge the struggles of both sides simultaneously.
Without making it a competition.
Exactly, without turning it into a competition of who has it worse.
The examples provided in the text for this are very specific, too. On one side, the author suggests bringing up the loneliness epidemic facing men and the societal lack of emotional support systems available to them.
Right?
And alongside that, you discuss the intense mental load and the persistent daily safety concerns that shape the experiences of women.
By presenting those realities together, the framework demonstrates that these are not competing issues.
Hmm?
The author frames them as two different manifestations of the same rigid societal expectations.
Another tactic she recommends for these group chat environments is the steelman technique.
This is a powerful one.
For those who haven't encountered this term, it is the deliberate opposite of a straw man argument. Instead of misrepresenting an opposing view just to easily dismiss it, you are instructed to describe the other person's argument so perfectly that they say, yes, that's exactly what I mean.
The text uses the example of traditional values here. If someone in the chat is arguing aggressively for traditional gender roles, the steelman technique would involve validating their underlying concern.
Because you're not attacking the stance, you're looking at the fear beneath it.
Right. You might articulate their genuine worry that the loss of traditional structures is removing stability from modern relationships. By articulating their fear better than they even did, you lower their defenses.
It establishes a baseline of respect before you even introduce your own perspective.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we also have to examine the actual environment where these debates are taking place. The text dedicates a whole section to warning readers about algorithm outrage.
Which is so relevant.
The author argues that in the digital age, isolation creates a breeding ground for radicalization. Social media algorithms are designed to prioritize engagement, which means they frequently feed users extreme caricatures of the opposite gender.
Because outrage keeps people scrolling, a user starts seeing a concentrated feed of just the worst possible behavior from the opposite sex, and it completely distorts their perception of reality.
And the text asserts that this amplifies the bleeding effect we discussed earlier. Individuals take their private, localized pain and have it constantly validated by an algorithmic feed.
It's like pouring gasoline on a fire.
It is. The author points out that when someone is raging online, they are rarely engaging with a real person. They are at war with an online ghost.
An online ghost.
Yeah, a composite of memes, tropes, and worst-case scenarios curated by a machine.
That's a fascinating way to look at it. The source material also addresses the inevitable pushback you get in these discussions. Specifically, it tackles what happens when someone brings out statistics to quote-unquote prove that one gender is statistically worse or more harmful than the other.
The author's advice for handling statistical arguments is to acknowledge the data. She notes that numbers are absolutely relevant for broad social policy.
Sure.
However, she argues that applying demographic data points to individual human beings and personal relationships is a trap.
A total trap.
The text suggests that deciding the other side is the enemy, based on a spreadsheet, effectively kills the potential for a healthy connection before it even begins.
The argument is that you cannot heal a private wound by going on the offensive against a public demographic.
Exactly.
Which naturally transitions into the broader philosophy found in the author's Lovers and Haters books. The text draws a very firm line between two types of people, but she clarifies that when she uses the term lovers, she is not referring to romance.
No, she's describing lovers of the soul. The framework divides people along behavioral and spiritual lines. The text describes lovers as friends of God and free spiritual beings. The author uses everyday examples to illustrate this category too.
Like the smiling cashier.
Yes, a lover is described as the smiling cashier at the grocery store. It is the teenager who actually takes the time to communicate their feelings clearly. Or it's the friend who sits with you and holds your hand through a really difficult season.
And the text notes that lovers are not defined by perfection. They still have flaws, they still make mistakes, but their defining characteristic is that they prioritize healing.
That's the key difference.
If they recognize they are acting out of unhealed pain, they step back to work on themselves rather than projecting it onto someone else.
Whereas the opposing category in this framework is the haters. The text characterizes these individuals as being driven by jealousy, fear, unresolved trauma, and low self-esteem.
A very heavy burden to carry.
Very. They're described as engaging in low vibrational activities with gossiping and putting others down listed as primary examples.
The author includes a very direct warning regarding this group, actually. The text states that if a hater knows you care about them, they will view your empathy as a weakness, and they will use it to walk all over you.
The author explores this divide through a specifically biblical lens, drawing heavily from the King James Version of the Bible. She outlines a belief that God operates on a divine timeline for what she terms the Great Separation.
Impartially looking at the text, how does she illustrate that?
To illustrate this, the text references the parable of the wheat and the tares found in Matthew 13:30. It's a story where good and evil are allowed to grow side by side until a designated time of harvest.
And the source material also references the book of Jeremiah to support this idea of spiritual DNA. The author asserts that God knows an individual's spiritual makeup before they are even born, suggesting that the path of being a lover or a hater is known from the very beginning.
But regardless of the reader's personal worldview, the author extracts actionable advice from this spiritual framework.
Right, there's practical application.
Her outlined procedure for dealing with individuals she categorizes as haters is to set firm boundaries, take the situation to God in prayer, and create distance. To summarize this approach, the text includes the well-known quote from Maya Angelou: "When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time."
It is a clear call to observe behavior and act accordingly without trying to force someone into a mold they just don't fit. And here's where it gets really interesting. This classification of lovers and haters leads directly into a major warning the author gives about seeking guidance.
A very important warning.
She highlights the extreme danger of taking relationship advice from hurt people.
The text argues that relying on advice from someone carrying unresolved pain is comparable to navigating with a faulty compass. The underlying psychology is that hurt people inherently generalize their trauma. They map their specific negative experiences onto the entire world.
And the material provides clear examples of what this jaded advice sounds like in practice. On one side, it lists jaded men saying things like, "All women are after your money," or warning that marriage is a trap.
We hear that all the time.
All the time. On the other side, it lists jaded women declaring all men eventually cheat, or reacting to a genuinely kind partner by saying, "He's too good to be true, there is always a catch."
The author explains that absorbing this type of advice creates a self-fulfilling prophecy. When a person adopts a jaded perspective, they enter new relationships anticipating betrayal.
They're looking for it.
Right.
Yeah.
This mindset poisons the interaction with suspicion and defensiveness. It effectively destroys the relationship's chances before it can even develop organically.
The text uses a food analogy to clarify this point that I thought was brilliant. The author writes that just because someone else had a terrible experience with a specific type of food and warns you to stay away from it, that does not guarantee you will have a bad experience.
It's subjective. And to avoid passing down this jaded advice, the text outlines specific steps for healing from betrayal. The process requires taking personal responsibility, setting new boundaries, and practicing forgiveness.
Though she emphasizes that forgiveness in this context is not about condoning the betrayal.
No, not at all. It's rather about releasing the hold that the trauma has on the individual's future.
Understanding this entire framework really requires looking at the source of the advice itself. We need to introduce the background of Blaze on Fire.
Yes, her story is crucial here.
She is the host of the Fi Relationship podcast and the author of the book Lost, Alone, and Afraid. Among the source materials is a deeply personal poem she wrote titled On Fire, which details her own history with trauma.
The poem presents a genuinely harrowing narrative. The author details her experience surviving severe abuse from a figure she refers to in the text as the creeper.
The verses describe a profound sense of isolation, feeling lost, alone, and suicidal as a direct result of the trauma inflicted upon her.
The poem really traces her emotional state. It details how the abuse wore down her tolerance and significantly deepened her disdain for mankind. She was actively living in the space of unhealed trauma that she now warns her readers about.
She was in it.
She was absolutely in it. But the narrative arc of the poem pivots on her decision not to remain in that state. The text describes her calling out to God to rise above the pain and shame.
And in the aftermath of this decision, she adopts a new persona referred to as the Blue Flame.
The blue flame.
That persona is heavily integrated into the visual branding provided in our source materials. The aesthetic is built entirely around fiery motifs.
She uses phoenix imagery for her brand, Royal Love Entertainment, which visually reinforces that classic theme of rising from the ashes of trauma.
The color palette features bold pinks and reds.
The visuals are clearly designed to communicate resilience and a total refusal to be diminished by past abuse.
One of the most prominent pieces of her visual branding is a highly detailed cartoon. It depicts a character described as a Hood Martha Stewart.
I love that image.
It's fantastic. The character is wearing a muumuu, she has a cigar, and she is casually cooking cornbread at the stove. It is a humorous, culturally resonant image that illustrates her uncompromising approach to relationships. The character is entirely comfortable in her own skin, totally unbothered by outside expectations.
What's fascinating here is how the author's personal survival story contextualizes her central thesis. Given the severity of the abuse detailed in the poem, she has every justification to be entirely jaded.
She truly does.
She fits the exact profile of someone who could easily buy into the gender war and just project her trauma onto others. Yet she actively rejects that path.
She chooses to say no to the gender war, focusing her energy on personal healing and setting boundaries instead.
It's a powerful choice.
So what does this all mean? The author's closing argument loops back to where we started today. The overarching message is that the gender war dominating our group chats and timelines is largely an illusion. It's built on collective, unhealed pain.
The text argues that to move forward, people must stop volunteering as soldiers in a fabricated war. We have to stop projecting our worst personal experiences onto half the global population.
We've spent this time exploring the author's premise that the gender war is often a smokescreen for personal trauma.
And it raises an important question for you, the learner, to explore on your own. Think about a passionate, systemic war or conflict you find yourself fighting in your own life right now, whether it's political, generational, or social. Is it possible that your anger toward that entire group is actually just a reflection of a private wound you haven't yet addressed?
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive, learner. We encourage you to keep questioning the concepts we unpacked today, keep learning, and remember the author's core advice: stop bleeding on people who didn't cut you. Catch you next time.